One of the biggest questions that I got from sharing my JFDI system and my AI executive assistant system it was the audit trail, like the self-learning part. And so I want to show you a couple of pieces of that. And what's fun is I'm going to start by showing you how this started and really kind of how I learned this was going to work and how I kind of inadvertently built a very, very simple but very, very powerful memory system that I'm now adapting into what I would call a proper memory system. But this has been working so well that I don't want people to think that you have to do a fancy database memory system with vector search and all that stuff to get the power. So the way I set things up, and I set this up pretty early, like in the first couple of weeks of building the system, once I had a handful of agents and commands that I was using on a daily basis, I wanted to have them learn from patterns in usage. And so the way I did that is there's sort of two main pieces here, and they're nested. And this is like a bigger sort of design concept that I have a lot of includes. One of the issues with context management is loading, really big files. And some of my agents and slash commands are pretty big. But making it so that they can progressively load through included files is really what's happening here. So every single agent and command, including the main agent, so this is my Claude.md as well, it has some version of this important statement that tells it to read the agent startup. Actually, there's two different versions. There's a startup and a startup quick. They work basically the same way. The quick one works well in some of my agents because they kind of get spun up. They do one single task and then they hand off what they gather. And so the quick one is fine. For a more robust workflow, like for instance, my morning overview, where's my overview? Like my overview command is enormous. It's like, what is this? 1,500 lines. So there's a lot going on to make sure that this one works all the time. But part of that, a big part of that is actually that before it does anything, it loads this agent startup checklist. And you'll see the very first thing in the agent startup checklist is the audit trail creation requirements. And that tells it, after any workflow operation, it's got to create an audit trail, where to save it, and the structure. So it's going into an audit folder. Every day it gets a new folder, and then inside of it, it is a bunch of files, usually the agent name, and then an activity markdown. And then there is a specific template of the structure and framework of what goes in there, and then when and why. But we're going to go into the implementation file. This is really kind of at the heart of what makes the audit trail system work on the generating side. So again, every agent ends up here, and then before it's done, it is required to write a file that provides visibility into what happened, decisions that were made, data for the strategic advisor, which is another agent that comes along and notices opportunities within the rule set that I gave it. So this is where a lot of the proactive stuff comes from, is from the strategic advisor, and so on and so forth. And when I originally started this trust through transparency is like a core value of the system, where I design things to provide me maximum transparency, and then as a byproduct of that transparency becomes value to both me and the system. So effectively what's happening is this rule set has it come through and say, what happened, what actions were taken, what decisions were made within context, what options were considered. That's a really interesting one, because a lot of times I'm asking the system, hey, what are my options and how do I trade them off? And so it does that too, and then does it autonomously, which is pretty amazing. Data for data analysis, files that were created, cross-agent notes is super helpful for when, especially like that morning overview is a great one, because I've got a relationship manager, a task orchestrator, and a strategic advisor, and actually a few that run in parallel to each other. And so while they're running, they're not necessarily talking to each other. I've seen people do this with, agent mail and some other ways. I don't feel like I need extra infrastructure to make this work. It kind of hashtag just happens. Here are some like data integrity parts, where it says these are the things that need to be in every file. It is still an LLM, and so like it follows these rules well, not perfectly. And so there's another TypeScript validator that comes through, I think once a day, or maybe it's a little less often, where it's basically checking data integrity and quality. I shared a video of, if you go on, I think I posted on LinkedIn and on Twitter, the quality audit of the files generated by this. And so that is a mix of, again, deterministic TypeScript and a rule set where it will do an evaluation, look for improvements, and then actually make those improvements. Quality standards, where those are recommended, and so on and so forth. And so this happens, again, basically with everything of consequence in the system for the last 2 months or so, has been generating a lot of useful information. And you can see every day there's a folder. And then inside that folder, I've got individual commands like my meeting processing. Every time it's doing research on a person, which it uses my inbox to do, not the internet. So it is very, very tightly scoped research about a person based on actual communication and the relationship that we have. That all gets logged. I'm not going to dox anybody, so go in there, but you get the general drift. And come in here, here's a pattern. You see the person researcher. That's literally happening all the time in the system, so you get a lot of those files. But outside of those, what's a good example here? Knowledge activity. This is a cool one where it processed a link. I dropped in a YouTube link. This was a Raycast hidden features link. This is actually a really cool one because this is a small task that happens a lot, but it is noticing the decisions, where to put things, and things like that. And then I have another command called synthesize that I run this once a week. Right now it's still a manual step, but I could just as easily make it a automated one, and it could happen more or less often. I'm still kind of the reason it's manual is I'm playing with the quality of the results based on how many audits it needs to get good results. But what this does is it looks at all the audit trails, looks at past synthesis, looks at my daily briefs, and there's another pattern tracker agent that runs around just looking for things that happen as a pattern. And it synthesizes all of that. And basically what this comes down to is, and it's also using commit history, which has been amazing how much, not everything hits Git now that I have more things in a database, but you get so much value out of that. Look at the audit trails, running the pattern miner agent, running the recommendation tracker agent. System gap detector agent is another one where it goes, hey, these two things are happening and they're fine, but if they talk to each other, both of them will be better. So it's going to notice that and suggest improvements to the system. Cross-week analysis, and then it generates a weekly synthesis. If I do get an idea of what that looks like, one of my most recent ones, this is from a week ago, and you can see that it is tracking weekly patterns cross-week, and it is also paying attention to whether or not I implement its recommendations. So basically it comes in here and says, this is oversimplified, but the goal here was to have it say, hey, you did this this certain way the last 3 times. Do you want to just make that an SOP so I don't have to guess each time and potentially guess wrong? And so this goes through, it looks at all those patterns, assigns them a confidence score, which is what these percentages are. And some of these are noticing patterns in my behavior decisions. Some are patterns in the systems that we've built and how they're working or not, errors that they throw. Sort of what's happening, and it's wild what it picks up, especially again with the fact that it's reading my Git history. It's able to pick up like technical velocity, which is wild, and then it makes recommendations, and it basically puts those into my queue for things that I may want to build, and loads up. It basically helps sort them by things like readiness and potential impact and how much it'll break the system. So this is a pretty sophisticated memory system with no vector search, and it is really geared towards turning actions that are repeated into consistent patterns to make sure they stay consistent, right? But it also allows a lot of space for emergent recommendations, and I don't know what the number is. I could probably ask it what percentage of features grew out of this system, and if I had to ballpark it, it's probably somewhere near a third, where it's like, hey, if we built this feature or we updated this feature in this way, this problem would go away or this opportunity would be greater. And that's, I've never worked with anything quite like that, a human or software. I mean, humans, obviously, I work with creative people all the time and they suggest things, but I've never worked with somebody who does it so systematically and consistently. And I feel like there's a lesson in there somewhere for people who are trying to stand out at work, because this is truly blowing my mind. So that is how the current audit trail system works at a very high level. And basically when things graduate out of here, they end up in my SOPs, which is at the system level. Basically, this docs section is everything from particular patterns and standards for development. It is various bits of system reference, documentation on subsystems. Like, it is the most thorough documentation for anything I've ever made, because this thing is really good at documenting things. It's basically documentation all the way down. So that is what it looks like. It has been running for a while. I just gave it an upgrade, and that upgrade is pretty cool. It looks like this. Give this a quick refresh so you can see. And all right, so the way this works is I am now, so my Claude sessions file, so every time you type into Claude code, it's logging everything locally. Basically every session, all the things you message, all the agent messages, all the tool calls, all the file touches, all that stuff gets saved to a JSON file. It's, I guess, technically JSON-L, because it's long. I don't actually know what JSON-L is for. Those take up a lot of space. They don't take up a lot of space in the hard drive, but actually Claude code, if yours is slow starting up and you've been using it for a while, it's because it's parsing all of those when you load it up. So I have those cleaned up about once a week. I might end up cleaning them up a little bit more often, but regardless of the cleanup, the reason I can clean them up confidently is I'm shoving them right into my database. And so I have this giant searchable database of every session. You can see almost 2,000 sessions. And now these 2,000 sessions are things like me talking to it, and working with it, but it also includes things like agent runs and commands that are automated. So it's stuff that doesn't include my direct like invocation or interaction, or is in here too. And again, totally searchable, organized by, and this is like the system guesses these, and it's not 100% right, but it's not super important that it is, at least not yet. Whether or not it is classified basically means classification. I have a little thing. If I come in here and I open it up, I can say classify with Haiku, and oh, that's a big one, so I'm not going to do that one there. Let's do it with a smaller one. Here's an internal task, actually, the memory catcher. We're going to come back to the memory catcher in a second. So I have this little button here, and this appears in a few other places around the interface, like my session picker and stuff like that. Basically, it takes the transcript, throws it at Haiku for a fairly cheap, fast summary, and it generates a nicer title than just the first line of the message. Takes about the 15 or 20 seconds here, and session ended without user interaction. So it is really basing this on my interactions rather than its, and that actually might be a bug I want to fix. At any rate, what I just add, so this is, in a way, your first line of defense when it comes to memory, right? These files contain everything. So I think of this as like longest term memory. It's everything that went back and forth. It's the highest resolution, but it would be like the equivalent of remembering everything you ever said and everything another person or a coworker or another person said. That's just not all that useful. So, and it's useful for reference, but in terms of like the day-to-day, you don't need access to all of that. But you do need access to moments of consequence, is the way I think about it, right? So the newest addition to the system is memories. And memories is a system that currently is set up in a job, and I'm still kind of like experimenting before I backfill my entire session. If I even decide to backfill the entire session, I haven't decided, but new Claude code sessions get inserted into the Claude sessions table, and then another job comes along and looks at them and suggests, or I should say extracts. I didn't like the verb extract, so I said, let's make it catch memories. I was thinking about like dream catchers and memory catchers. So what this does is it looks at the chat transcript for certain types of memorable moments. And those memorable moments include decisions, insights. I'm not actually sure confidence means here, especially because there's just one. notices patterns, notices commitments that I make, notices learning moments, it notices corrections, which is not identical to learning. That cross-agent thing, workflows, gaps are a cool one. Again, that's like two systems that are doing things that if they talk to each other would be better. So it automatically looks at every session and it catches the memories and it generates individual memories. I think it's currently set, it can generate as few as 0 to 1 memory if there's anything of consequence. But there's also no upper bound. Like, it is meant to go through and extract things. And so this is going to take a little bit of tuning of the exact prompt and stuff like that. But you can see the actual memories that it's generating. The timestamp here is not the timestamp of when the memory was quote unquote caught or generated by the LM. It is tied to when the original moment that was worth remembering gets saved. So this is basically pulling out that stuff, and you can see some really interesting things. So without even clicking in here, you can see that this is a memory related to learning. It is categorized it as data. It is given it a confidence score of 85%, its extraction. It is also identified what it's calling entities, which is a noun, right? So that's any person in the system, that's a business that I interact with. Basically, like almost anything that is a database entity has the potential to be linked here. And it automatically links this memory to that entity. Why does that matter? Well, the last piece of this is using Claude Code hooks in a way where it can, when I post something, on the fly, extract entities using the same rule set, and then instantly look up the entities and any potential memories linked with them, and contextually inject them along with whatever I type into the chat box, so that I don't have to open up a new chat and give Claude Code a bunch of context about what I'm working on. So I'm going to give you a concrete example, and this is a live demo. Let's see if this actually works. So if I come up here and I'm going to start a brand new clean chat, move my face out of the way, and we're going to say, tell me about my friend Dan. Now here's what I happen to know. I have multiple Dans in the system, and if it works correctly, pretty quickly, it should figure out that Dan is a person. It should hit the database, look up the potential Dans, found them, both of them, and says, which one did you mean? Because there's two, and it doesn't want to. One of my rules in the system is don't guess. If you're not 100% sure, verify. So if I were to create another one, let's see, what's a good example here? So, all right, I happen to know that there's one here. It's like, when is the last time I talked to Kathy? Again, I didn't even give it a last name. Just first name, and obviously the more information I give it here, the better. But previously, I would have to say a bunch of things about that person. And if we were in a chat session, either earlier that day or even a couple of days ago, I'd have to kind of rebuild it all from the start. And this found that there's only one Kathy entity. It went and found the person file in the system, which includes the last contact. And there you go. So in this case, it wasn't the last time I talked to Kathy. It was that she was mentioned in an email about it. That's a little tweaking that I can do, because I did specify talk to Kathy versus she shows up anywhere in the system, but you get the drift. So thinking about memory in terms of like the longest term context, which is those JSON L files, the useful caught memories, and then the ability to look up memories that might or have a high likelihood of being relevant to the session that I just started. And it doesn't just do this at the top of a new session. It'll do it anywhere in the session. It's going to extract memories and it's going to keep doing it. So this is brand new. I literally built this in the last 24 hours. And it's pretty awesome. And there's even this little thing that, like, if it extracts a memory, but it doesn't know, it doesn't know where in the system it represents, like, in this case, these are partners that we have. And so I have a file for Kent C. Dodds, who is a friend and a client, and it mentions Epic Web, but we don't have a standalone Epic Web entity yet. And so I have to figure out, what does that mean? Do I want to or not? And this lets me, ignore it. I could type ahead to resolve it. It does the same thing with files. Basically, that means that if I'm talking about a particular problem area or something like that, it can look at the last time I talked about that problem area or part of the app or feature or whatever it is. And instead of having to scan for all the files, it can look at the last time we worked on this, what files did it touch, and save a bunch of time and tokens while doing it. So again, this doesn't even have a vector search component to it. I had a great call with my buddy Joel Hooks this morning and a bunch of his crew from Egghead. And like Joel has some cool open source stuff that I'm going to try out as adding a vector layer to this and see what that unlocks. Because my last 2 attempts, I'm pretty sure I was just doing vector stuff wrong. But we'll see. That'll be an update in the future. So that is the evolution of a very powerful but also very simple text-based memory system, and a much more sophisticated one that I'm kind of evolving it towards. And my plan is to keep running them in parallel, and at some point in the future I may merge them, I may keep them separate if they generate notably different results. Otherwise, they'll end up being sort of one and the same. But I really do kind of like the simplicity, the beauty of the flat file-based one. So that's my update for the day.